All right, guys, we're going to start day 4 of our notes for the India and China unit. We're going to move from India across the Himalayan mountains and cover China. We'll start with a little bit of review since it's been a while since we talked about China. And from there, we'll cover the 3 Chinese philosophies that come to light at the end of the Warring States period. So as we remember, China was isolated from other civilizations by natural barriers. To the north was the Gobi Desert, and to the northwest, the Taklamakan. China was separated from India by the Himalayas, along with the plateau of Tibet. And to the east, they were surrounded by the Pacific Ocean. China was able to create a successful civilization by farming along 2 rivers. The northern river was the Huanghe or Yellow River, and to the south you had the Yangtze River. Both of these rivers would provide the Chinese with a special silt called loess. It was deposited when these rivers flooded and allowed them to have arable or farmable land. We break Chinese history up into dynasties, which is when one family rules concurrently, usually passed down from father to son. We started with the Shang dynasty, but they would go on to be seen as poor rulers by the people, and the Zhou family would rise up and take what they called the mandate of heaven. And that was the idea that the gods were removing a poor ruler from power and installing a good ruler who would help the people. So the Zhou dynasty would then step into power and control China. And they would do that until the period of warring states. This map shows how China has increased in size, starting with the Shang dynasty, which was the red area, and then would expand under the Zhou dynasty, which was yellow, the Qin dynasty, which we'll go in depth about next class, is the blue, and finally we get the Han dynasty, where they really extend themselves to the west following the Taklamakan Desert, because there would be a trade route that goes through that desert called the Silk Road. More on that later. Luckily, we're not going to have you guys write all this down. But as we enter the period of warring states, we had the Zhou dynasty, which had been ruling China for hundreds of years, all the way back to 1122 BCE. They never really had total control of all the people of China. They started out as strong conquerors for the first 300 years of their rule, but weren't actually that great at governing, and their power had been on the decline. The majority of the Chinese people were farmers. Traditionally, China had been a feudal state. In a feudal system of government, we have warlords who rule the land, and they owed military service to the king. But recently, there had been a shift away from feudal control of the land to private ownership. People with no ties to the king ruling the land. This and other changes have disrupted the old ways of life. Due to the instability of the Zhou family, there has been a constant struggle for power. There is constant warfare with China's neighbors, especially those to the north, and that brings even more instability and hardship to the people. The situation has left many people in China wondering if the Zhou family is losing the mandate of heaven. Rulers claim to possess the mandate of heaven because they believe that God selected them to rule China. The biggest concern is that there is no direction from the government. This has led to chaos as everyone has different ideas as to what is best for China. Many individuals have come forward with good ideas to bring order to China, which is what we're going to talk about today in class. Some believe that the ruler must be a kind father figure. Others believe society should be based on very strict laws and harsh punishments. And there are also some people who believe there should not be any government or laws at all. So our first philosophy is going to be Confucianism, which was created by Confucius. So that's going to make it easy to remember the founder of this philosophy. Confucius was born during the decline of the Zhou dynasty during the period of warring states, when he saw chaos throughout China. He believed order would return to China if people lived by a system of ethics, and that's your commonly accepted rights and wrongs in a society. And Confucius would believe that people are generally good. If you leave people alone by themselves, they're going to do right by each other. Here's an artist's depiction of Confucius. And anytime you can grow your mustache so long that it blends into your beard, you're doing it right. Also notice his hat. It's got like layers. It's a pretty good hat. Maybe top 10 of the year. Confucius said that society should be organized around 5 basic relationships: the ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older brother and younger brother, and friend to friend. In each of these relationships, there was a proper code of conduct which you must follow. Confucius hoped that if people knew what was expected of them, they would behave correctly. That's very similar to school. We give you a syllabus with all of our expectations, and we expect you to be able to follow it so you know how to behave correctly and get the best grade. Confucius was a big fan of the Chinese idea of filial piety, which is respect for your parents and the worship of your dead ancestors. And here in the picture, we can see a son bowing down and showing his father respect. So, in these 5 relationships, each person must give obedience and respect to the superior. The subject should respect and listen to the ruler. The wife needs to listen to her husband. The son must listen and respect his parents. The younger brother looks up to the older brother. And in return, the superior of each relationship owes loving responsibility to the inferior. So if a ruler is kind and does right by his people, then the subjects, the people, should be loyal to him and follow his commands. And of course, in this picture, we've got the older brother helping out the younger brother. Of course, if it was me, as I'm putting on those goggles, I would probably stretch them out a little bit and make sure they smack my brother right in the face, because that's what brothers are supposed to do. Education was very important to the philosophy of Confucianism. Education meant advancement. So we had social mobility. Through education, you could move up in society and become part of one of the higher classes. Confucian ideas would become the foundation of Chinese government, and this would take place during the Han Dynasty, which we're not there yet. We still have to cover the Qin Dynasty. We'll get to that next class. And this Chinese government was run by a bureaucracy. And we've talked about bureaucracy before in our Egypt lesson. It means we have trained civil servants who are going to run the day-to-day operation of the government. They're going to make sure that everything runs smoothly. In China, these bureaucrats were called mandarins, and they were the scholars, and they were the ones who ran the government. In the Han Dynasty, following Confucianism, they created the civil service exam. And you would take this exam or test, and it would be required in order to get a government job. How well you did on this test would tell you which job you would have, which meant how much respect you would get, and the income that you would receive. And this test would be a requirement all the way until 1912. And it tested your knowledge of Confucian teachings, as well as history, amongst other subjects. So this test would have been more important to the ancient Chinese than the SAT test that we take today, but they are somewhat similar, as in the SAT score can help determine what college that you can get into. Okay, this civil service exam would decide what job in the government you could get. So both were very important. So on the right, we've got our examination cells. You can tell that they were making sure that people couldn't cheat next to their neighbor. And on the left is a depiction of these tests being taken. These tests could take 2 to 3 days, and you were not supposed to leave your examination cell. You would have your own personal proctor watching over you. Now in this case, this test taker has fallen asleep, and he's actually dreaming. Now, there is a morbid story of a test taker who ended up failing, and because he failed, he committed suicide. And the Chinese believe that he was a ghost, but he would bring you good luck. So this guy is dreaming about the ghost coming down to help him out on the test so he doesn't fail it either. After Confucius dies, his followers are going to write down all of his sayings and quotes in a book called the Analects. So it's not really a holy book, but it is the book that we need to know to associate with Confucianism. So I would circle the Analects on your notes. Our next philosophy is legalism, and we think of legal systems, we should be thinking of laws. The founder is Han Fei, and he believed that people are naturally evil and greedy. If you leave people by themselves, they're going to take advantage of each other and do bad things to each other to get what they want. And I think Han Fei pretty much had it there. So he said order comes through strict laws and the enforcement of those laws with harsh punishments. You need to scare the people into doing the right thing. He said that rulers should be strong and ruthless. Whatever it took to stay in power and crush their enemies, that's what you're going to do. And he said thinkers, philosophers, and scholars and their ideas should be controlled by the government. Of course, that's something we're not big on here in the United States. We believe in free speech. Under legalism, there was no free speech. Anything that was considered out of line would be punished. So the legalists that followed Han Fei believed in a strong government, where we have a ruler with absolute power, and everyone must listen to him. Now, those who performed well would be rewarded with riches, but those who couldn't follow directions would face harsh punishments. Usually, they would end in you being tattooed and sent to work on the Great Wall of China until you died. We will see this system of philosophy used by Qin Shi Huangdi. He is going to be the first emperor of China, and under his leadership, we had the Qin dynasty. And he would use legalism to unite and control China. He was known for burning Confucian books and killing the scholars. And when we think of governments who kill off people who think, are scholars, philosophers, and burn books, we're usually thinking of regimes like Communist China, the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, the Nazis, fascist Italy under Mussolini. Okay, so governments that aren't very nice to the people. Qin Shi Huangdi himself was a pretty nasty guy. He actually wanted to be immortal. He wanted to live forever. And he did some crazy stuff to try to get there, but it didn't work out. Our last philosophy is Taoism, and sometimes you see it spelled with a T, still Taoism. It was founded by Lao Tzu, and he was said to be about 50 years older than Confucius. And he writes the book, Tao Te Ching, which is the way and its power. So remember what Tao Te Ching is. I would put a star next to that. That's going to be the book for Taoism. And here we have a picture of Lao Tzu. Now they said when he was born, he already had a beard and gray hair because they equated gray hair and a beard with wisdom. So he was already wise from the moment of birth. And at the end of his life, when he had dropped all the knowledge that he was going to, he had taught everything he possibly could, he said, well, I'm out. He jumped on his ox and kind of wandered off into the sunset, never to be seen again, like the ultimate mic drop. So Taoism means the way. And the Tao is the universal force connected to nature that creates order for all things. People gain peace and happiness by becoming one with the Tao, or by becoming one with nature. He said that life should be lived simply. You should practice humility. You should be humble. And you should seek harmony with nature. Okay, instead of being in school, he would say, go hang out under a tree and just be one with nature. He says humans are the only animal that fails to follow the Tao. So he doesn't really say that humans are good or bad, but they don't follow the Tao. So an example, we've got a river. Water always flows to the lowest point, so a river is always going to flow to the lowest point. Humans are going to get in the way and build a dam, and it's going to stop that flow of the river. So therefore, they're not following the Tao. They go out into the forest and they cut down trees. So they're not doing what they're supposed to do, according to Lao Tzu. So Taoists would say that rulers should make fewer laws. If you don't have as many laws, you won't have as many criminals. You won't have as many people breaking the law. They believe in Wu Wei, which is a way of ruling, action through non-action. Let things take care of themselves. Go with the flow. When there is no desire, all things are at peace. What does that sound like? When there's no desire, things are at peace. What other philosophy or religion have we talked about that has that same idea? Write that in the chat if you can come up with something. So you should be thinking Buddhism and reaching nirvana, trying to stop the cycle of desire. And Taoists would also say that a ruler cannot force the people to prosper. You can't make laws that will make people do their best. You just have to let them do what they do. The same can be said of teachers. We try to do our best to make you guys have good grades, but some of you guys just refuse to listen and do things your own way, and that's why you don't get good grades. We can't force you to do it. We can only help guide you. Going back to the Shang Dynasty, some other beliefs included I Ching, which was reading the Book of Changes, which was used by oracles to answer some of life's questions. We also had the idea of yin and yang, which will go on to become the symbol of Taoism. We have two powers that represent the natural rhythms of nature together, and you need to have both sides, an equal amount of yin and yang. Finally, in China, it was acceptable to follow three philosophies at the same time. You could be a Buddhist because that concerns yourself. How do I free myself from suffering? You can be a Taoist. Okay, how do you work in relation to nature? And you can be a Confucianist at the same time because that's how you relate to the community. So you could be a Taoist, Confucianist, and Buddhist all at the same time. The one that really doesn't work though is being a legalist. They're a little bit different, a little bit harsher. Well, a lot harsher. So with that, we're done with another day of notes. We'll go into depth with the Qin and Han dynasties next class.